What's up, patrons? Ugh, I'm sweaty. Sorry, just ate breakfast. But I wanted to show off something I've been working on. Obviously, you guys know that I've been doing the ECTO-1 build from EAGLEMOSS for the last few months. And I did not have a build for the previous box because it was only a partial thing. It was like the rear suspension, but then nothing. And then I found out that the next box was going to be the wheels and the rest of the suspension. And of course, we had the exhaust in there as well. So the live streams, frankly, have not done well. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to bother live streaming this thing anymore unless people really want to see it. I'd rather post like updates and stuff like that. But at least for you guys, you get to see what I did yesterday. So first and foremost, the first new step was to do the firewall, the brake master cylinder, these connection rods, the windshield wiper motor, and then whatever the heck that is. And then running associated hoses that were already pre-existent. Actually running that singular brake line there that go in under the car was kind of a pain in the ass. In fact, assembling this and getting it in place and then putting on the hoses and then trying to screw that down was a pain in the ass. Most of it has been. And what's crazy is, as huge as this car is, look how tight that engine bay actually is, you know? And then, of course, we have the oil reservoir, the battery, stuff like that. That has all come prior. And then you still have the steering shaft hanging out the top. Now, what you'll obviously see here is the rear end is in the thing. So let's take a look underneath the car. And by the way, yes, it is getting very heavy. It'll lean very nicely there. So we have the full exhaust system in there. And since we had the headers originally up in there, they just kind of tab in, and then you just run the exhaust where it needs to go. You get little brackets here and here. Those screw in from the top. And then as you get further down, you get to this bracket. And then there's a couple screws holding the far end of the exhaust pipe. And then you get this final bracket way back here. Now what I really want to talk about is this rear suspension. So they gave you the differential and stuff like that. I already had the drive shaft in place, but I wasn't paying attention when I was assembling, and I actually knocked it out of the transmission. So I already had the full rear end installed, had to actually take apart the U-joint and put it in, just like you would a real car, which was really interesting. So let's talk about the construction here. So obviously you have to flip the car over every time you're doing a step. You assembled the actual differential with, you know, the front of the case here, and then the rear back like that. And then you assemble that leaf spring. So you take that leaf string, you put the shackles on both ends, which are very strange how they use that. And then you use this bracket right here to attach the leaf spring to the diff. And then you put the diff in place. You line up your, what I assume is like a torsion rod or a panhard rod, something like that. And you assemble a shock, which is right up under there, which is kind of hard to see. It's actually spring-loaded cylinder. Well, let me see if I can turn it over completely. Being super careful, because I want you to see how this goes. There's a little scrape itch there. So here's the shock, and you can see the hoses that run there. So it actually has shocks, or hoses that run between the shocks. That's to keep them level. So instead of having a anti-roll bar, it uses hydraulics to, you know, whenever you go one way, it forces it to the other side. That's really interesting how they do that. And then you've got the brake lines that run from the wheels, stuff like that. But the main point I'm trying to make is they have you assemble this side completely. Put the wheel on, the brake drum, all of that, and install it. And then you come to this side after you've installed the whole thing, and then you assemble the leaf spring, the shock, all that stuff, and then you assemble it in place. And that's not how you do a rear end in a car. If you're honest with yourself, you actually do both leaf springs, you install the shocks, and then you go from there. Now I get that it would have been hard to deal with the kind of hand-sprung nature of the shocks, but without the wheels there, it slides and locks in place with a screw. So you could have actually tightened it up to where it was at a certain position and then got it where it needed to go. But normally you put on the leaf springs, you could put on the shocks, then you set the differential in place, you bolt your brackets in place, you flip it over, you bolt the other brackets in place, then you connect all your shit. Now, one thing I am missing, you see a tiny hole, there should be a very small bracket that holds those lines. That thing went flying and I have not been able to find it. Nor did I know how I was going to screw that in, as it's actually behind the diff. So why wouldn't they have you install that bracket early on? So, part of my point is, hold on, what is this? Sorry, I saw a little black thing on the ground, I was hoping it was it. So, my main point, sometimes the way they assemble the car is not the best way to assemble the car. But it's really cool because it does technically have working suspension. It does have spring-loaded springs. So, that's pretty cool. So it took me about 2.5 hours, maybe a little bit longer, to do all that, plus the firewall. And it tore up my finger a little bit. One thing about that screwdriver I'm using, it's a little rough, so I actually put gloves on to finish. And made sure I had my 3-in-1 oil, made it real easy to put in a lot of the screws. It's interesting that they haven't given us the sound control or anything like that as of yet. And of course, one thing that's dumb, they make you build the front end and the bumper and all that stuff as a teaser, and you do nothing with it for a very long time. Actually, let me see here. So I've got my issues. Okay, so let's see here. Issue 10, issue 9. So this is the latest issue. This is the one. Let's see what's coming up next, because I did not look. Ooh, okay, so we got steering wheel. We've got the shift column, the turn signal actuators. Offhand, I don't know what that is. Transmission cooler, maybe? Kind of what it looks like. And then dash parts. And then, no. Bunch of lines. Or hoses. Something. Not sure. So this was everything that came in this one. So this actually was one of the only ones that made sense. Rear suspension, tires. Totally makes sense to have that together. Though I would have done the tires and rear suspension, I don't know, before the front radiator support. Like, it's the thing that makes no sense. They could have had the car in this rolling chassis way before you did anything up here with the radiator, because none of that interferes with that. The firewall, who cares? It would have made more sense to get it in a rolling chassis. Fine, get the exhaust under there, get your transmission hooked up, all that stuff. That makes sense. Also, coffee. But why? Why bother with things up here when you don't even have the thing? Now I can finally sit it on all its wheels. I don't have to have it propped up by a glove box anymore. So that's just where this is. And yeah, the main issue with the way they have you assemble that rear end is that you're having to flip it, flip it, flip it, flip it, flip it, flip it, flip it. And then you get to a point where I'm literally got it nose down at the carpet trying to attach a screw. And it was a pain in the ass. So this is going to go back in its spot. Obviously, I'm in the living room because my desktop is incredibly messy. So I'm going to do a lot of reviews today and then work on other things. So, guys, thanks as always for your patronage.